They told us the English would be here by breakfast. Major Weber, a man with a stiff collar and an even stiffer attitude, had been saying it for a week straight. "They are coming, gentlemen. Hold the line. For the fatherland." It all sounded very dramatic in the abstract. In reality, we were just cold. My name is Eric, a Gefreiter in the Imperial German Army, currently stationed in a highly fortified position near Bapaume. Our trenches were, admittedly, better built than what we heard about the English. We had actual dugouts, some even reinforced with concrete, and the mud, while constant, was managed. But the waiting was a different kind of hell. The boredom was a dull ache that only the sound of distant artillery could temporarily cure. Our section of the line was relatively quiet, a quiet that always felt temporary, like holding your breath before a dive. I spent my days repairing sandbags and trading schnapps for extra coffee with our supply corporal. We knew a massive British push was coming. Our spies had confirmed the build-up. The sheer number of men they were gathering was an open secret. We also had our own secret. A new Maxim machine gun position, built into a clever little observation post disguised as a pile of rubble. Me and my friend, Karl, a quiet baker from Munich, manned it. Karl talked about dough and yeast the way some men talked about women. He missed the smell of a warm bakery. The night before the expected offensive, the silence was intense. No Man's Land was a ghostly stretch of barbed wire and craters, caught in the sickly light of the occasional flare that would arc high and drift down slowly, illuminating the twisted landscape in stark white light, making every shadow jump. "Do you think they'll really come walking again?" Karl whispered, checking the water jacket of the machine gun for the 10th time. "They did last time," I replied, staring out into the darkness. The British command seemed to prefer the straight-ahead approach, a tactic that cost them dearly every time. "They think we're cowards, Karl. They think enough English spirit can beat German steel." He sighed, a puff of frozen breath in the air. "I just want to bake bread, Eric." The shelling began about an hour before dawn. It wasn't the kind of heavy, slow bombardment that usually heralded an attack. It was brief, focused, designed to terrify rather than decimate. Our position held up fine. When it stopped, the silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. I gripped the wooden handles of the machine gun, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear the faint sound of whistles in the distance, cutting through the morning mist. They were coming. The waiting was over. The whistles were the signal. That sound always sent a shiver down my spine, a small, cold sound that meant thousands of men were about to walk into hell. Karl was muttering to himself, probably reciting a recipe for stolen. I kept my eyes fixed on the mist, which was thick enough to hide an army. "Wait for my command, Karl," I whispered, though there was no one else in earshot. Not until they hit the wire. The mist ahead started to shift. Gray, spectral figures emerged from the gloom. The British, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, moving in a slow, steady wave. Just walking. My breath caught in my throat. They looked so exposed, so fragile. Just boys really wrapped in that khaki cloth. For a second, a strange, terrible thought crossed my mind. They were just as human as we were. Then the Major's words came back to me. For the fatherland. Hold the line. This was war. It was them or us. My moment of weakness vanished, replaced by a cold, operational focus. They were about 30 yards from our position. I could hear their boots sucking in the mud now. "Now, Karl. Fire!" I unleashed the Maxim. The gun roared to life, a steady, hammering rhythm that felt like it was vibrating through my very bones. The air immediately filled with the smell of cordite. In front of us, the British line disintegrated. Men simply fell. They stumbled, cried out, or just crumpled into the mud. It was like a scythe cutting through the wheat. The sheer efficiency of it was horrifying, but also exhilarating in a grim way. We were holding them. Karl was feeding the ammunition belt with a speed I'd never seen from him, his face a mask of concentration. "Faster, Eric, faster. They keep coming." And they did. They just kept coming, wave after wave, tripping over the bodies of their comrades, falling into the shell craters. The noise was incredible, the barking of the machine guns all along our line, The screams of the wounded, the sporadic pop of rifle fired at a T1 point. A young English soldier, no older than 15 it looked, somehow made it past the initial wire and was scrambling toward our trench line, a bayonet fixed to his rifle, his face a mask of terror and determination. He was alone. I aimed my rifle at him, not the machine gun. A single shot. He dropped maybe 5 yards from the trench. The attack finally broke. The remaining soldiers threw themselves into craters for cover or turned and scrambled back through the wire, dragging their wounded if they could. The ground in front of our position was a sea of dead and dying. The noise faded back to the distant groans of pain. The air was thick with smoke. We stopped firing. Carl slumped against the concrete wall of the dugout, tears streaming down his face. "So much blood, Eric," he whispered. "So much." I didn't say anything. I just stared out at the harvest we had reaped. We had won the day. We had held the line. And I had never felt so utterly empty. The next 24 hours were a blur of work parties and the grim task of securing the line. The immediate threat was gone, but the aftermath was something else entirely. The battlefield in front of our trench, once just a wasteland of mud and craters, was now something else, something far worse. The smell was the first thing that got to you when the wind blew the wrong way. We were ordered to take prisoners and secure the wounded who lay in no man's land. A task done under an informal ceasefire of sorts. It was a strange, silent ritual of war. I was assigned to a recovery detail with Carl. He still hadn't really spoken much since the firing stopped, just moved with a kind of numb efficiency. We walked out into the open ground, the silence a stark contrast to the noise of the day before. The scale of the slaughter was immense up close. The boy I had shot was still there, near our wire. I looked at his face. He looked so peaceful now, the terror gone. I found a small leather pouch with some coins in his pocket, but nothing else. Just a name tag. Carl was working near a large shell crater, helping one of our medics load a wounded English soldier onto a stretcher. The Englishman had a bad leg wound, bleeding through the crude bandage. As we worked, the English soldier looked at Carl, his eyes full of pain and fear. "Water," the soldier rasped in broken German. Carl just stopped what he was doing. He reached into his tunic pocket and pulled out that little tin he always carried, the one with his wife's picture pasted on top. It wasn't the treacle the English soldier from the other story had, but a small tin of dark, rich fruitcake his wife had sent months ago. A piece of home he'd been saving. He opened the tin, the sweet smell of fruit and spices cutting through the stench of the battlefield. He broke off a small piece and, ignoring the medic's skeptical look, held it to the wounded man's lips. The English soldier ate it greedily. A flicker of gratitude passed across his face, and for a second, just a second, the hatred and the war disappeared. It was just one man giving another man a piece of cake. When the soldier was taken away, Carl put the tin back in his pocket, snapped it shut, and just stood there, staring out at the bodies. "They are just like us, Eric," he said, his voice quiet. "They have wives, and they eat cake." I nodded, the truth of his words heavier than all the rifles in the German army. We held the line. The major was happy. But as we walked back to the trench, the taste of cordite still in the air, I knew that victory felt a lot like defeat. The war had taken our humanity and replaced it with duty, but in that moment with the cake, a sliver of the baker from Munich had pushed through. It was a fleeting moment of grace in a graceless place.